So again, my childish little drawing, I'm showing you zygomatic bone, frontal bone, the perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone, which is coming straight down the middle of the nasal cavity. The maxillary bones, which are fused midline, just like the frontal bones. Of course, remember, in development, we don't have sutures between parietal bones and frontal bones. We have the fontanelles. That allows for the parietal bones to shift so that, right, every baby comes out egghead shaped. Right? It's kind of scary at first because you're like, man, what's up with my cone head baby? And then what happens, right? They can leave it that way, and then you have cone head shape where they put a little cap on them, right? And it just kind of conform because it's still soft and malleable. That's why you don't want to drop the baby on their head. Right? Otherwise, the OBGYN or the nurse gets sued. Okay? So, yeah, let me give them a slightly bigger dome. How's that? There we go. Slightly bigger dome. All right. Okay. So now, the maxillary, so let's talk about the perpendicular plate and the nasal cavity, guys. So the nasal cavity, there are bones. So the ethmoid bone, if I were to pull the ethmoid bone up, so right there where I drew those are the nasal bones. Don't confuse nasal bones for the bones that are over here. There's a little set of bones right here that has a hole in it. Those are the lacrimal bones. Okay? So notice guys, most of the bones are paired. Zygomatic bones are paired, maxillary bones are paired, frontal bones are paired, parietal bones are paired, temporal bones are paired. But what happens? Some of those paired bones fuse early, like the maxillary, the palatine bones, right? They make up the roof of the mouth. Remember we were talking about that the other day? Cleft lip, not necessarily a cleft palate. But if you have the cleft palate, guaranteed you're going to have the cleft lip. And when you go to talk, now I knew somebody who had that. He had the defect of both the cleft palate and the lip. They fixed the lip, but they did not fix the palate. Now they can fix the palate because they have artificial bone inserts that they can put into the roof of the oral cavity. Did everybody get me? Guys, the maxilla is the floor of the nasal cavity. The perpendicular plate of the ethmoid bone will split the nasal cavity. The ethmoid bone itself is up here in the center of the skull, so it's the roof of the nasal cavity. Did everybody hear me?
What is the roof?
The roof of the nasal cavity is the ethmoid bone, because the ethmoid bone is right in here. The ethmoid bone is hidden in here, it's stuck in the middle, and it's square, and it's doing this, and all that's pink. That's the ethmoid bone. And then separately, it's got this little spine going up. So you can't see it. You gotta pull the skull apart to get to this bone. Sure enough, there is a skull in the lab that you guys should look at. It's up on the top. Matter of fact, there's one in this lab, right across the way there. There's an exploded one. It's in that lab. It's got all the parts exploded out in the skull, so you can see it. The ethmoid is delicate, guys. The ethmoid is delicate. The ethmoid is delicate. Inside of it, it has these things called ethmoid air cells. So now I'm going to attempt to draw it for you. This is what it looks like. So if I pull this pink structure out of the middle of the skull, this is what the ethmoid bone looks like. So it's got this plate of bone, and then it's got this spike. And it has this downward spike. That's the perpendicular plate, and that's the crista galli. Crista galli. And this is the perpendicular plate. Guys, that line is my shorthand for perpendicular plate. I'm not writing perpendicular no more. You got me messed up. Perpendicular lines. Everybody have me? 90-degree perpendicular lines. Alright? Perpendicular plates. Everybody got me? It's splitting the nasal cavity in the left and right halves. So then separately, over here to the left and right, there's this set of bones that's going to come down. It's like that. And it's going to stop. It's going to stop short. And then what's going to happen is the maxilla is meeting up. So there's the maxilla. Well, the maxilla extends down on the sides, doesn't it? To hold the teeth. Everyone agree? Everyone see where I'm at? I'm back here. So I took my human specimen, right? Dead, hopefully. Frozen, yes, preferably. Take it to the bandsaw. Right? And slice them. And you can see this part within this area. Do you understand that? And separately, there are two hooks. I'm going to erase the label for perpendicular plate. And that's the superior and middle nasal concha. What are they for? Anybody know? What are they for? Why do we have these in our nasal cavity?
Airways?
Okay, the airway. What's the airway doing?
Providing air.
Elaborate.
What happens if I don't have that? What would happen?
Like a certain amount of air passes through.
So what happens? As the air flows, right? It if it wasn't there, it would just flow right through. Got me? But because it's there, then the air hits it and it acts to create turbulent flow.
Right.
And by doing so, it warms and humidifies the air. This is why they tell you to breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. And this is why you gotta be careful when you're up north and it's cold, because you're breathing in through your nose, right? And then out through your mouth. And then you'll start what? You start tearing, right? You start secreting excess mucus because there's a lot going on here. I have this covered with epithelium, guys. Here we're just talking about the bone. But the reality is in the human, it's covered with epithelium. And that epithelium is like skin, but not like skin, meaning it's an epithelial layer, has a basement membrane like skin, but it may not necessarily be like skin. And there's hair in that epithelium. And and it's probably the most coarsest hair you've ever known, because if you pull one of them and you try to tickle somebody, it actually feels like a splinter. Oh my God, you guys are just so dead, man. Tough crowd.
I took them to terminal.
Wow, tough crowd. All right. So these really thick hairs, you guys are in there because this is covered with a mucus line kind of membrane that has hair that acts to filter. Separately, we have bone in there that will prevent the air from just flowing through. It'll cause the air as it comes through to bounce off. And so sure enough, when you look into the model, you'll find this. Look on the inside, you'll see the grooves. You'll see the hooks. They also call them turbinates. The reason why they call them concha is because concha look what? Like snail shells. Right? Conchas like snail shells. They're squirrely snail shells, you see? They're just not complete. They're not complete. Yes, question.
So in the book, it doesn't have the superior. Where, in the book, is this little picture here.
Yeah, it's there though. Trust me, it's there. It's up there. It's just hidden way up. The only way to really get to it is if you did like this as a diagnostic tool, you would see these turbinates swollen, and that would be a sinusitis, form of sinusitis. So if you look, you'll see it, and the book will describe it. Now, here's the interesting thing. The superior and middles are part of the ethmoid bone. This is all ethmoid, guys. This is ethmoid bone. And the ethmoid bone is in the center of the skull. So, sure enough, this plate here, that's called the cribriform plate. And the cribriform plate is important. Well, here's why it's important. Because cranial nerve number 1, the neurons
cranial nerve number 1 actually sit protected. These bipolar neurons that you'll learn about later, they sit within the cribriform plate. So these neurons are associated with the epithelial lining. And as air comes in separately, we can trap it. Why? Because in the wall, in the lateral wall, which guys, this is the eye, right here. That right there, that's the medial aspect. That's the medial aspect of orbit. That's the medial plate of the orbit, which is right here. So the ethmoid bone is behind the lacrimal bones. Did everybody hear me? So you got nasal bones, right? Then you have part of what's the maxilla here, fusing with frontal. Then you have lacrimal, and then behind that you have ethmoid. There you got me? And behind the ethmoid, you have the sphenoid. Okay? Behind the ethmoid, you have the sphenoid. Everybody hear me? Behind the ethmoid, you have the sphenoid. And the sphenoid is the keystone bone. What do I mean by that? Well, the sphenoid bone, I call it the keystone bone. I know they probably call the ethmoid the keystone bone. But I would say it's more the sphenoid. The keystone bone is that keystone that you have to put in the center of your archway, so that weight can be distributed across the entire arch. All right? This is the advancement of humans. This is how we were able to create, right, to get the aqueduct, to get water to civilizations where there was no water. All right? To make these archways was key because you could put a load on it. That keystone bone is the center of that archway. Well, that sphenoid bone is the keystone bone for the skull and the face together. So the sphenoid plays this huge role on gluing the bones of the face to the skull. Did everybody hear me? I'm not telling you that the ethmoid doesn't play a role as well, but I'm telling you the sphenoid plays a bigger role. Because why? Because it plays a huge role in actually assembling the skull. The skull itself, the floor of the skull, which protects the brain. The center bone there is the sphenoid bone. So every bone, guys, has a center of ossification. Did everybody hear me? It has its own center of ossification. There's no primary center, no secondary center like long bone. All right? It's like the vertebra. Vertebrae have multiple centers of ossification to make that ring, and then the body, right? Where these guys they're just different areas of the bone, they're different areas of the skull, making the bones to pair up, ultimately to make the face. And of course, the eyes, the ears, and the smell, the olfactory, cranial nerve number 1. So cranial nerve number 1 is smell. Cranial nerve number 2 is the optic nerve for sight, purely sensory, guys. Everybody hear me? Then what? The only other sensory is what?
Hearing.
Is hearing. But hearing is not just about hearing, it's also about balance. This is why one of the weakest points in the human body, ladies, is the ear. I don't care how big they are. You cup your hand, you slap the ear, and you'll see them roll over into a fetal position and cry for at least 4 to 5 minutes. Because why? Because you're overriding their sense of balance. Because your ear is not just for hearing, it's for balance. You understand? Right? From the martial arts, we understand the human condition, because it's from war that we understand how these all these atrocities, and then trying to treat and cure and figure out how to aid these veterans back into normal life. Right? So years and years of this stuff. What's that? Well, we get into it. So your ear has two different actual sets of sensors involved. And one has to do with balance, the other one has to do with amplification of sound. And so when you slap the ear, it overrides both. So they don't know where their head is in position, the rest of their body become completely disoriented. They'll roll up into a fetal ball and begin to cry. Doesn't matter how big they are. Doesn't matter. Right? So, and it's interesting because sure enough, since it's such a delicate thing, then it would make sense that I would have those sensors in the hardest bone in the skull. Did everybody hear me? And I can tell you it's that hard because I took a wood chisel and a hammer to an old woman's skull to try and get to
the nerve. And all I wound up doing was beating the skull, those shattered to pieces, and I didn't see anything. So it kind of sucked. It kind of wasted her whole skull. I beat it, what I did is I cut it in half first, and I beat it to hell to try and get the structures out. And I couldn't find anything. So it's very difficult to do because that bone is so hard. Now I don't know if any of you know what a bone chisel is, right? A bone chisel is the same as a wood chisel. Anybody know what a wood chisel is?
Yeah.
So use a wood chisel to chisel stuff out of your door when you go to install a lock for the first time in a door jam. So these are metal doors. When you go to install a lock, you gotta drill holes and you gotta do a really nice job. You can tell how good somebody is by how crappy they do the job. Right, where the hole is a lot bigger than the insert of the lock, right? Those of you who are laughing know exactly what I'm talking about, right? Because it's probably the first time you ever used a wood chisel. And you're supposed to take a little at a time, not a lot, right? Take a little at a time, take less, and you work your way. So yeah, gotta be very precise. You just gotta be very precise when you're doing this stuff. So a decent wood chisel, guys. Anything you can buy at your basic office, Home Depot, or Shell Lumber, whatever, with a hammer would split a bone easily, a human bone easily. But I can tell you, like long bone. But I can tell you that bone right there, okay, almost nearly impossible for me to even get the top of it off, so I could see where But sure enough, you guys got beautiful models in the lab, guys. You guys see the big model in the lab with the ear? It's in this lab and up in 2213. I can tell you, as my professor, I guarantee that model would have been on the test if I had time to show it to you guys, because that right there it's got the mastoid process, it's got the pinna of the ear, the landmark structure is the mastoid process. Right next to the sternocleidomastoid mastoid muscle, right? And that right there, that mastoid process, guys, is the landmark structure for the petrous portion of the temporal bone. Sure enough, what Jesus Christ said that he would build what? His church on the rock, right? Which was Peter. Everyone agree? That's what Petrus means, isn't it? It means rock-like. So it makes sense that the temporal bone, they call it the petrous portion of the temporal bone. So left and right temporal bones got a very important job to do, don't they? They got to protect cranial nerve number 8. Everybody hear me? So now for the first time, you're getting 3 cranial nerves introduced to you. The first one is this guy, CN1, which is your olfactory. Your olfactory nerves, they actually sit within the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone. Okay? Separately, if you look, see how I drew this channel. Everybody see that in here in the orbit, I drew this channel. So I'm going to remove lacrimal bones. I'll label it from this direction. Does everybody see that channel with that little hole right there? That little hole right there? Well, sure enough, that hole right there is cranial nerve number 2, your optic nerves. And that's your sphenoid bone. That's the optic canal. Each side has one. So you got on either side here, you got the nerve. It's actually traveling back because the eyeball's sitting in there. So if I would kind of draw it in 3-dimensional form, I could. So you can see how the nerves are coming out there. Does that kind of look a little bit better? Looks like it's kind of sticking out at you. So that if you were to cut somebody's eyeball out of the socket, you'd have to remove the bone. You'd have to remove the muscles that are attaching the eye. There's 6 muscles attaching the eye to the orbit, so that the eye can be moved, manipulated. So you cut those muscles, and then you go behind the eyeball and you cut the nerve, and the eyeball comes out. All right, and we'll talk about the eyeball later. So that nerve is running through the optic canal, it's called the optic foramen, the optic canal. And that optic canal is running through the sphenoid bone. Did everybody hear me? So the sphenoid bone, the keystone bone, which is a key bone of the skull, it attaches the occipital bone and the temporal bones
to the ethmoid bone and the frontal bone.